Hey everyone, today's video is going to be a little bit different. We're going to take a look at a couple of retro handhelds. We're going to take a look at the Anbernic RG353v as well as the Miyoo Mini Plus. Today's video is not going to be technical and it's not going to be a deep dive into these systems. I'm actually completely new to retro handhelds, so I figured this would be a good chance to share what it's like, I guess, jumping into this scene coming from handheld PCs, but also being a console gamer growing up. And one thing before we jump into it, I was sent the RG353 from Geek Buying. The Miyoo Mini Plus I had purchased myself off of Amazon. However, I will be sharing both links for Geek Buying, so if you want to get a discount, check out the links in the description. And now that we've got everything covered, let's dive into it. Taking a look at these two devices, you can see that they look fairly similar. Obviously, there's joysticks on the Anbernic where there isn't that on the Mini Plus, which, depending on what you're planning to actually play on the device, will probably impact which one you actually want to get. And considering that this Anbernic is about twice the cost of the Miyoo Mini Plus, it doesn't really make it a clear decision. Some advantages for the Anbernic with the joysticks is more compatibility with PlayStation 1 games, so games that require a joystick, you're going to be able to play those, as well as Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast games. But if you're only wanting to play like Super Nintendo, regular Nintendo, all the way up to PlayStation, some compatibility, then the Miyoo Mini Plus is probably going to do it for you. And before we get into gameplay, let's take a quick look at the specs and take a look at some of the physical differences between these two devices. Starting off with the Anbernic, it has an RK3566 quad-core 64-bit processor at 1.8 GHz, 2 GB of LPDDR4 RAM at 1056 MHz, 32 GB of eMMC storage, 2 microSD card slots, and it has dual operating systems. It runs Android and Linux. It has Wi-Fi capable of 2.4 or 5 GHz. It has Bluetooth 4.2, a 3.5mm audio jack, mini HDMI out, a 3200 mAh battery, and a 3.5-inch screen at 640 by 480 resolution. Moving on to the Miyoo Mini Plus, it has an ARM Cortex A7 dual-core processor at 1.2 GHz. It has 128 MB of DDR3 RAM, 1 microSD card slot. It runs Linux, has Wi-Fi, a 3.5mm headphone jack, a 3000 mAh battery, and a 3.5-inch 640 by 480 IPS display. Now taking a quick look at the size of these two devices, you can see that the Anbernic is about the size of a Game Boy Pocket. It's smaller than a Game Boy Color and the original Game Boy, and of course it has a larger display. And as you can see, the Miyoo Mini is smaller than the rest, and the crazy part is that this is the Plus version, so there is actually the Miyoo Mini that's even smaller yet. And now we can take a look at the Anbernic. So the D-pad is really nice. I've never had a missed movement on it. The buttons are all nice soft press. The joysticks are pretty tight and they do click down. And the face buttons do feel pretty good. They're a little bit small, but it makes sense for the size of the device. On the side, you have the power and a reset, and at the top, you have all of your ports, except for one that's on the bottom. So if you take a look at the other side, you have your volume rocker, and if we go to the back, you can see we have our L1, R1, L2, and R2, which all seem to work well. They're a little bit clicky, but not too clicky. And moving on to the Miyoo Mini Plus, it's a pretty simple design, but it works very well. The D-pad feels really good, and the face buttons have a nice size to them, and they also have a nice press. And heading over to the back side, we have L1, R1, L2, R2, which, just like the Anbernic, they feel pretty good, and it looks like you can open up the battery compartment here if you wanted to change the battery. I'm not familiar with that process, so I'm not going to go into it. And if we look at the top here, we can see that we have our power button, and then on the side, we have our volume rocker. At the bottom, we have our micro SD card slot, 3.5mm audio. Overall, though, the device feels good in the hand, and it's fairly light to hold. Moving over to the OS, I'm just going to show the Linux side of the Anbernic. I haven't set up the Android side yet. So if you purchase the one with the larger SD card, this is what you get. It's already pre-set up with these emulators and some ROMs and BIOS files. If you just get the base model, you can always set up Garlic OS. I've heard that it works fairly well on this device. And moving on to the Miyoo Mini Plus, so I actually put on Onion OS, so I'm not using the stock OS that comes with the device. But this is super easy to set up. I'll go over some guides near the end of the video, as well as leave links for some videos in the description. As you can see, it supports up to PSX, or as most people know it, the PlayStation 1. And there are other consoles like the Neo Geo and Virtual Boy, stuff that aren't quite as common. So you can see that the OS is fairly versatile, so it can pretty much handle most of the ROMs that you're probably going to be putting on it. Next, we'll move on to some game tests. We'll start with the Anbernic, and I'm also going to keep these fairly short. First up is Super Nintendo and The Legend of Zelda. Next, we'll take a look at some PlayStation 1 gameplay, so let's look at Crash Team Racing. Next, we'll take a look at Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64, one of the games where we need a joystick. And our last game to show is on the Dreamcast, so we're going to take a look at Sonic Adventure. And one last little bonus, I'll show you the HDMI out and what it looks like. You'll need a mini HDMI to test it out, so thankfully I had one for my portable monitor, and you'll also have to plug it in before you turn the device on. And there you have it, we can see it on the display in the background there. Just keep in mind that not all games are going to look good on a display. Older games tend to show the pixelation and the rough edges a lot more when you put it on a large display. But either way, it's still cool that they built that functionality into the device. Now we'll take a look at some gameplay on the Miyoo Mini Plus. We'll start off with Super Nintendo and Yoshi's Island. Next, we'll take a look at Donkey Kong Country 2, also on the Super Nintendo. And the last game demo on the Miyoo Mini Plus is Crash Team Racing on PlayStation 1. So as you can see, the games run fairly well on the device, at least the ones that I tested. So when it comes to choosing one of these devices, if you want more compatibility for PlayStation 1, the ability to play N64 and Dreamcast games, you should probably go with the Anbernic. If you're okay with some PS1 games not being compatible and playing mostly the older systems, then I would definitely recommend the Miyoo Mini Plus, which would only make sense because it's literally half the price. So the next question is, do I actually recommend picking up one of these if you have a handheld PC? And I guess the answer really depends. If you like retro games, then definitely I would say this is worth picking up. The thing that I probably like the most about them is that you could just turn them back on and continue playing right where you left off, like it's instant. When you're playing with a handheld PC, there's a lot more steps, a lot more to go through. You have to usually sign in, you have to authenticate. Something that I became a little too aware of when I was on a flight, and Steam and Xbox both wanted me to sign in to authenticate a particular game, which made it where I couldn't play because there was no Wi-Fi on that flight. In everyday practice, I do keep them in the bag. I find that if I'm going somewhere with my wife and she's going to run into the store, sometimes it could be an hour, which is good for the handheld PC, but sometimes she's only gone for 5 to 10 minutes, where I'll usually pull out one of these guys. So if you're in a situation like me, I definitely recommend it. I have been using them quite a bit. And with the Miyoo Mini Plus starting at $50, you really can't go wrong. So I'm going to drop some links in the video description. If you're going to grab one with the SD card, that means that you're going to get the OS and the ROMs already installed. If you decide not to get that, then you'll just have to set it up yourself. And there's a few guides from Retro Game Corps as well as Joey's Retro Handhelds that I found very helpful when trying to figure out some of these things for the first time. If you're going to use the links in the description, don't forget the coupon code. It will save you some money. For the Miyoo Mini Plus, I believe it drops the price by $5 or $10, and on the other one, it's a little bit more significant. I think it's like $20 or $30. And of course, I'll keep the codes up to date. Sometimes the prices drop even lower. And one thing for the coupon code, you'll need to enter it when you're in the cart, and that's when the new price will appear. So don't be thrown off by the higher prices when you first click on the link. And a special thank you to Geek Buying for providing the Anbernic RG353v for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.